We are indeed all on our way to the promised land. Thank you for that. I love it when it just so happens that the song lines up with the sermon, even though I don't tell the song leader anything. So thank you for that. If you got a Bible with you, go ahead and be turning to Deuteronomy 9. We'll be spending our time in the first couple of chapters there today, this evening, as we're looking at, as we read, the Israelites about to enter the promised land. They're on the edge, and Moses is giving his final speech, his last words to the people of Israel. So he sits down on this mountain, and he decides to address all of the people, and these are his last words. He says, let's talk about history. Now, how do you feel about history as a subject in school? Maybe you really like it. Maybe you don't really like it all that much. Maybe there are parts of it you like and parts of it you don't enjoy as much. Maybe you're a world history fan, but not as much of an American history fan. That's me. Maybe you know a lot of church history, but you don't know much otherwise, and that's okay with you, or whatever it is. Maybe you had a good teacher and they made history enjoyable, or maybe you had a bad teacher and they didn't. And here we are. How do you feel about history? Because God gave us a lot of it. God gave us a book full of history, a bunch of examples, good and bad, that just keep repeating themselves throughout the ages, and then he expects us to listen to it and to learn something from it. And that's what Moses says here. He sits down in verse 1 of chapter 9. He says, listen, Israel, you're about to cross over. You're about to get into Canaan. You're about to start on this journey, this conquering of the lands. But I have a few things I want to say to you from your past. Let me tell you about some bad examples to not do, some good examples that you should be following, and then some general promises that you can trust in along the way. Some things you shouldn't do, some things you should do, and some things that you can take comfort in as they are completely constant. And he starts in the beginning with Israel. He says, Israel, here's what you don't do. Don't emulate yourselves. Look at verse 4 of Deuteronomy chapter 9. Look at verses 4 and 5 and 6. He's sitting there. He says, you're going to drive these people out as the Lord has told you. And then in verse 4, he says, now when the Lord drives these people out before you, don't say to yourself, the Lord brought me in to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. The Lord will drive out these nations before you because of their wickedness. You are not going to take possession of that land because of your righteousness or your integrity. Instead, the Lord your God will drive out these nations before you because of their wickedness, in order to fulfill the promise he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So understand that the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness. No, you are a stiff-necked people. He opens up his message and he says, Israel, don't trust in yourself. Right? This is his initial message. Israel, don't trust in yourself. You're going to walk into this really nice Canaan land. You're going to walk into an area where you can have houses and you can have farms and you can have steady jobs and a place to live, and you don't have to move around anymore. And when you get there, you're going to tell yourself that it's because you're so good and you're so great and you deserve everything and you earned all of it. And really, that's not the message at all. No, God gave it to you. It's not because you're so good, it's because God's so good. And don't get those two things out of order. But Israel always trusts in itself. That's the problem. Israel always puts the focus on themselves and on itself as a nation. They take the glory for themselves. They take all the blessings for themselves. And when they don't have quite everything they want, they complain about it. Right? What happens because of Israel's pride? Think back in the Exodus, in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, or even further ahead in their history to Judges, to Joshua, Judges, and on from there. What happens because of Israelite pride? It's nothing good. And Moses is going to tell us that because he's going to give us 3 examples here. Down in verse 7, he says, now remember, this is a history lesson, folks. Remember, don't forget how you provoked the Lord your God in the wilderness. You've been rebelling against the Lord from the day you left Egypt until you reach this place. You provoked the Lord at Horeb, that is Mount Sinai, where the Lord gave them the 10 Commandments, and they absolutely rejected them. You provoked the Lord at Mount Sinai. He was angry enough with you to destroy you. This is what you've done in the past. What did you do? What comes of your pride? What did you do by trusting in yourself? You forgot God. You rebelled against him. You walked away from him, and you irritated him. You angered him because you forgot who he was. Israel, don't do that. Don't be those people anymore. Drop down in verse 12. Moses is atop the mountain in chapter 9 and verse 12. Moses is standing on the mountain talking to the Lord, and the Lord says to him, "Get up, go down immediately from here. Your people whom you brought out of Egypt have acted corruptly. They have quickly turned away from the way that I have commanded them. They made the cast image for themselves." That's the golden calf in Exodus 32. They've made an idol and walked away even after promising just 40 days before that they would do everything God says. They've made an idol and walked away. And the Lord also said to me in verse 13, "Now I have seen this people. Indeed, they are a stiff-necked people. Leave me alone. I'll destroy them. Blot out their name from under heaven. I'll make you into a nation stronger, more numerous than they." So I, Moses, I went back down the mountain. While it was blazing with fire, the 2 tablets of the covenant were in my hands, and I saw how you sinned against the Lord your God. You made a calf image for yourselves. You quickly turned away from the way that the Lord had commanded you. So I took hold of those 2 tablets, the 10 Commandments, the symbol of the covenant that God had with his people. And what does Moses do? I threw them from my hands and shattered them before your eyes. Israel, stop being prideful. Israel, stop relying on yourself. Don't be the people that looks to themselves, because you looked for yourself for guidance in the golden calf, and look where it brought you, right? Not only did it bring you to angering God, it brought you to a destruction and a desecration of his commandments. And now his covenant is literally and symbolically broken as Moses shatters the 10 Commandments on the ground. Israel, look where your pride has brought you. When you conquer the lands, it's not because you're good, it's because God's good. So don't rely on yourselves, and don't trust in yourselves anymore. And of course, Israel didn't learn from that lesson earlier. Down in verses 22 through 24, you continue to provoke the Lord at Taberah and Massa and Kibroth Hatava after the golden calf incident, and they learned from that, and they decided to dedicate themselves to the Lord instead of going away from him. Now suddenly they're complaining that they don't have any food and that God's not going to do anything for them, and God's not going to provide for them. He's not going to give them food, and then he gives them food. So they complain that they don't have any water. And then he gives them water, so they complain they don't have any food again. And now this nation who should have learned from the incident of the golden calf hasn't learned, and they're repeating their same mistakes, because history tends to repeat itself. And they run back into the same old problems of not trusting in the Lord. They trust in themselves to get food, and then they can't get food because it's a desert, and they wonder what the problem is. The Lord says you should have trusted, but they never do. Israel, don't do that. Moses' whole command throughout this chapter is just a command. Israel, hey, you people of God, don't be Israel. Don't be what you were. Don't be like you were, because what you were is not the people of God. You're the people who've glorified yourselves. That's not helping anybody. No, what you need to do, what you need to learn from your history is that you need to learn to actually rely on the Lord. You claim to be God's people, rely on the Lord. You claim to be faithful to God, rely on the Lord. You claim that everything you have comes from him and that all of your identity comes from him, rely on him. That's your negative example of stuff that you people used to do in your history. Please stop doing that. And instead, Moses doesn't just say, you're terrible people, and leave it at that and expect them to get better. He actually gives them a positive example. What's the one positive example that comes out of Israelite history at this point? Right? You look through really all of the old law, all of the wandering in the wilderness period. What's the one positive example that Moses could pull from? Moses says, it's me. It's me. I've done the right things the whole time. I've been being faithful the whole time. If you're going to learn from anyone, learn what not to do from what you used to do. But right now, you learn from me. Moses, humblest man who ever lived, and he shows them exactly what to do. In verse 8, when Israel has provoked God at Mount Sinai, when Israel has angered the Lord so that he wants to destroy them, Moses does the exact opposite of what Israel does. Israel spends time walking away from God. They spend 40 days going off after themselves and after their own direction. And Moses, in verse 9 of Deuteronomy 9, Moses says, "When I went up on the mountain to receive those stone tablets, the tablets of the covenant that the Lord made with you, I stayed on that mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I didn't eat food or drink water. On the day of the assembly, the Lord gave me the 2 stone tablets inscribed by God's finger, the exact words on them, which the Lord spoke to you from the fire on the mountain. And the Lord gave me those 2 stone tablets, the tablets of the covenant, at the end of the 40 days and 40 nights." Israel spends 40 days and 40 nights walking away from God, walking after idols, going somewhere else, anywhere else, and getting away from God. And what does Moses do in that time? He goes up the mountain to be with the Lord. 40 days, 40 nights, no food or drink, not distracting himself from God at all, but dedicating himself to the Lord, receiving the covenant from his hands and spending time with the Lord. Israel, don't be prideful and rely on yourselves like you used to be doing. Be humble and rely on God, like I, Moses, always do. Now, what does that look like? Right? How does it look? What does Moses do when he's relying on God? What does it look like when he does this? You find this in examples, because after every example of Israel doing something bad, Moses gives an example of him having the right response and him being faithful instead. In Deuteronomy 9, chapter 9, verse 17, when Moses shatters the 10 Commandments because of Israel's evil, look at verse 18, very next verse. Moses' response to the people's evil is that he fell down, like the first time, in the presence of the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights. And I didn't eat food or drink water because of all the sin you committed, doing what was evil in the Lord's sight and angering him. I was afraid of that fierce anger that the Lord had directed against you, because he's about to destroy you. But again, the Lord listened to me on that occasion, and the Lord was angry enough with Aaron even to destroy him. But Moses says, I prayed for Aaron at that time also, and then I took that sinful calf you'd made, and I burned it, and I crushed it, and I thoroughly ground it into powder, and into powder as fine as dust, and I threw that dust into the stream that came down from the mountain. Israel takes time and spends it building a calf so that they can stray away from God, so that they can go do something else. Moses faithfully spends his time in front of God, 40 days, 40 nights again, not distracting himself, but praying, mediating on behalf of the people. And then he destroys the object of their evil. He takes the calf, he melts it down, he crushes the melted down parts, he grinds down the crushed parts, and then he throws all that in the river so that it washes away and can never be put back. Moses is not having any of it. He's not having any appearance of having that golden calf stay around. This is what faith does. Don't trust in yourself, but trust in the Lord. In verses 23 and 24, 22 through 24, when Israel has disobeyed God time and time and time again, and they've complained about all these things, and they've not gone up to conquer the land like they were supposed to, in verse 25, Moses says, I fell down in the presence of the Lord 40 days and 40 nights because the Lord had threatened to destroy you, and I prayed to the Lord. And then the rest of chapter 9 is a prayer that Moses words. Every time Israel is unfaithful, Moses is faithful. And looking back, as he's standing on the edge of the promised land, he's saying, you're about to go right over there. When you go, don't forget. The unfaithfulness has always destroyed you. It's never done anything profitable. It's never helped you in any way. It's been faithfulness, even on the part of one man for the whole nation. It's been faithfulness that sustained you the entire way. Are you going to learn from your history or not? Israel, are you going to keep being like Israel, or instead are you going to do what Moses recommends and be Moses? Because there's a lot to learn from this man of God. Primarily, that he puts forth effort. He works to be nearer to God. In every situation, in every problem, in every time that Israel complains against him, complains to him, complains about him, even to his face, every single time, Moses goes to God, and God makes everything work out in the end. And so Moses says, Israel, here's what you don't do. Don't be prideful like you used to be. Israel, here's what you should do. You should be faithful like I was. But Israel, you know what's the most important thing? Is there's going to be some constancy. Even in the desert, there was someone who was still constant the entire time, who was still faithful the entire time, who was still loving and gracious towards you the entire time. And in the promised land, even though you're not going to do perfectly all of the time, there's going to be someone who's constant and who's loving and who's gracious every single time. It's not just about what Israel shouldn't do. It's not just about what Moses did and what Israel should be doing. It's about what the Lord will do. And the Lord starts out in chapter 10, in the first 5 verses, the Lord steps out and says this. The Lord said to me at that time, cut down 2 stone tablets, like the first ones, and come to me on the mountain and make a wooden ark. I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets you broke, and you are to place them in that ark. So I made an ark of acacia wood, cut 2 stone tablets like the first one, climbed the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hands, and then on the day of the assembly, the Lord wrote on the tablets what had been written previously, the 10 commandments that he had spoken to you on the mountain from the fire. And the Lord gave those to me, and I went back down the mountain. I placed those tablets in the ark, and they have remained there as the Lord commanded. What does all that mean? God is, has been, and always will be with his people. And this is what Moses brings it all back to, because it is about what Israel did that's wrong and that they should fix, and it is about what Moses did that they should emulate, but it's also about who God is and what God's done for them. What does he do in the first 5 verses? Do you see it? Because it's just like, God writes out the 10 commandments again. But think about that. God writes out the 10 commandments again. And that's pretty impressive when you think about it. Because Israel promises, we're going to do everything that God says for us to do. And God gives them the 10 commandments, and they say, we're going to do everything that God says for us to do. Little over a month later, they quit that. They make a golden calf. They drag themselves away, and they go and do something else entirely against God's plan. And they violate multiple of those 10 commandments that they were given as they walk away from God. That's breaking the covenant, and God immediately says, I'm going to make a covenant with this people. It's going to be the same covenant. And I want to work with them on this. Even though they've broken it, I'm not willing to let that go. I'm going to bring them back. The Lord will be with his people. If it's in Egypt, if it's in the wilderness, if it's in the land of Canaan itself, the Lord will be with its people. And we might ask, well, what does that look like? We see in the first 5 verses, he's going to establish his covenant again. But he goes even further than that in 2 other ways. In verse 8 and 9 of chapter 10, Deuteronomy 10, verse 8, now at that time the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the Lord's covenant, to stand before the Lord to serve him, to pronounce blessings in his name, as it is today. For this reason, Levi does not have a portion or inheritance like his brothers. He doesn't have any land that he inherits. The Lord is his inheritance, as the Lord your God told him. The Lord, part 1, he reestablishes a covenant with his people. And then step 2, he picks out a special people. Even among his people, he picks out a special people and calls them to himself. And he blesses them and he makes them close to him, like Moses wants all of them to be. He calls out a special people for his name to carry his name, even though these people really don't deserve it. He reestablishes the covenant. He calls out his special people. And then in verses 10 and 11, when Moses stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights like the first time, Again, this keeps coming back up. 40 days and 40 nights, just like the first time. The Lord also listened to me on this occasion. He agreed not to annihilate you, Moses being faithful again. Then the Lord said to me, in chapter 10 and verse 11, get up and continue your journey ahead of the people so that they may enter and possess the land that I swore to give their fathers. We saw this back in chapter 9 in verse 5 in really the introductory part to this reading. In verse 5, when Moses says, you're not going to take possession of the land because of your righteousness or your integrity. Instead, the Lord your God will drive out these nations before you because of their wickedness. Why does he do that? In order to fulfill the promise that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. The Lord is not content to just restore a covenant. He's not content to just call out a people and use and let them serve him. He wants to keep the promises that he's always made. That's been his entire goal throughout all of this, is to find a people where he can keep his promises to them. The people have not been willing, and God has not been able to, because the people haven't been willing, they haven't been wanting to. But what Moses is saying is, you need to trust in the Lord. He's made some promises. He's going to keep those promises. Because the Lord, well, he supports those who are his. He is a support to his people. Israel, if you want the promises of God, people of God, if you want the promises of God, you have to be his people. That's the condition of having the promises of the Lord. And so Israel, sitting on this mountain as they're about to walk into the land of Canaan, Moses sits there and he says, Israel, you got to learn three things. Okay, firstly, you got to learn to rely on the Lord. You got to look to God and his goodness, not on yourself. You haven't done anything worthwhile or you haven't done anything worthy or deserving. Rely on God because he's good and he's going to help you through it. How do you do that? Right? How do you rely on the Lord? You do what Moses did. You work towards the Lord. You do and you put forth effort in the things that God would have you to do. It's very simple. Moses did it all the time. Look to his example. Do what he did. Fall down before the Lord. Go to him and pray and go and receive his covenant. Be God's people. Don't rely on yourself. You should rely on the Lord. You should work towards the Lord. And really the third point is just the first point again, by the way. You can rely on the Lord. He's made some promises. Is the Lord faithful to his promises? Always. He is faithful to his promises. God will be close to his people. The Lord supports his people. And so, the call is for you to rely on the Lord. You rely on the Lord in such a way as to actually work towards him. That's what true reliance is. And in your working towards him, you realize that he'll be with you, and you can indeed rely on him. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you want to walk away from God, you can. But if you want to be close to God, you can rely on him and work for him. And he will bring you close to him. That's what he wants from his people. You can see it by the Lord's reactions. Even after all of the evil that Israel's done, even after all of the mess that they are, the Lord is still calling them back, and he's still summoning them, and he's still bringing them to himself. He's still reestablishing a covenant. He's still calling out a people. He's still making them special. You can rely on him. That's the call. And that's the point. This is what history is about. Is looking to the past to learn good lessons for the present so that you can use those lessons in the future. That's what history is about. And it's a nice history for Israel. And it's a nice warning for them to follow, which they obviously didn't follow as they walked into the land and promptly thought it was all about them. And things kind of fell apart in a couple books from Deuteronomy. But it is also not just for Israel, but it is the history of us. This is our people too. I'm not an Israelite, but I do want to be one of God's people. These are God's people. Misled, prideful, walking away from the Lord, but they still have a claim to be God's people. How often are we like them? How often are we Israel who's prideful and walking away? How often are we Moses who's humble and walking towards God? How often do we rely on the Lord to keep his promises as he's, promised us? This is our history, and as much as we can condemn them for it, as much as we can urge them to follow it, as much as we can be thankful that God promises what he does for them, he's promised it to us in an even greater degree. Is there something you need to do to be more like this Moses character, to be more willing to go towards the Lord, to stop relying on yourself and put it on God, to be one of his people, one of his children? Is there something we can do to help you? If there's anything that we can do, I'll be standing right here. You're free to let me know as we're standing and singing this song.